Thank you, Glenn. Thank you. Yes, I remember that. We get to celebrate just pretty close together. And my husband just celebrated. He is June 7th, and he likes that. He likes these 3 months, 3.5 or so months between where he gets to be 37 and I am still 36. And I hope that never changes, but it's a little bit of a pain. Um, my name's Carla, and I'm an alcoholic. And I want to thank you, Glenn, for the invitation to come out and share with you guys. It's for me this morning, for you guys this afternoon already. And I just, I was just thinking, I always uh, go through this little thing of like, how can I speed this up? How can I jazz this up? How can I make this, oh goodness, there we've got little Alex there. He's flinging his wares all around. Maybe we can get rid of him. Um, we keep, in my home group, we talk about Zoom bombers. One day they'll all be coming in and making their amends, but for now we have to just, kick them out. Anyway, I always wonder how I can make this talk fuller, or what do I forget to say? But what I always come back to for me, my confidence is in talking about what I was like, what happened, what I'm like today, why I'm still here, what I could not have a life if I didn't stop drinking. I came here because I had a drinking problem. I know that that's unpopular sometimes in Alcoholics Anonymous to say that, but I couldn't stop drinking. I just and if and without that, even though I knew that there was a spiritual that I am of spirit, I experienced a higher power and spiritual a level of spirituality as a small child. I could no longer access that. And everything I put into my body, and it was started and ended with alcohol, was the very thing that was blocking me from experiencing that sense of spirit or psyche, if you will, or just spiritual equilibrium. And and so I could have none of this. And the way that I got to have that finally was through Alcoholics Anonymous. My sobriety date, September 25th, 1987. And so that's what I'm going to talk about. And if you're new, I hope that you'll stay with us and come to trust these principles and use them in your life, and your life will change. And what I've experienced all these years later is that Alcoholics Anonymous doesn't remove the problems from my life, but it gives me a foundation on which to stand, so that I can meet the challenges of my life and experience the full texture of my life. I'm not afraid of my feelings. I don't need to escape. I don't always like what happens, and it doesn't mean I don't get afraid, but I have means to meet the challenges of my life these days. And I didn't always have that. I didn't know either when I got to AA at 29 years old that this wasn't going to be just one more place that promises to do something wonderful and then, kind of wears out after a few days or a couple of months or something. I'm somebody who, found alcohol at an early age and stuck with it until it was time to let it go. I know that there are people who come to Alcoholics Anonymous having built and lost great empires before their alcoholism really took them down. And so that's just not my story. And I would have told you that I was an alcoholic because of my crazy, dark, dramatic, violent, perverted family. If you had my family, you'd drink too. It was circumstance. If they hadn't have done that, I wouldn't have done this. And complete victim in my life, and in attitude. And like I told you before, when I was a small child, I felt spirit. I felt that ineffable essence, that life force, that divine spark that lives in all of us, that each of us has. Don't be fooled. We each have that. But when alcohol came along, it was just so much quicker than a prayer. I mean, it just solved my problem right away, or it felt like it did. I know that a lot of us say, including me, I used to say, oh, alcohol worked for me. And it certainly felt like it. But I can think of nobody in my life who ever said, give her another drink, it works for her. Nobody did. And, but it felt like it, didn't it? And so I let it. I began to let alcohol do the work. It became my spirituality. It became my growing up muscle. It became the thing that made me feel buffered from you and the thing that made me feel connected to you all at the same time. Why wouldn't I drink that? And I left home at an early age, and I still believe it was for me to leave home. It was my path. And even though I jumped from the frying pan into the fire for a while, I left home and I ended up out on the street learning how to turn tricks to make a living, and up in San Francisco, and thus it began. And I'm not against sex or even sex for money if that works for people. I know that that's a kind of a cultural thing in some in places, but it just wasn't on my list of things I wanted to be when I grew up, and I was 14, so it really wasn't time to make that choice. And if you had asked me a couple of years before, I would have told you I wanted to be the first woman to run a 4-minute mile, or the first woman president, or the first woman Major League Baseball player. I had dreams, and little by little, I let them fall away, and in favor of servicing alcohol. And ended up in a mental hospital and juvenile hall and foster homes and rehab at the state hospital, and then a girls' home that I ended up running away from as well, and went out the second-story window with my friends and ended up, hitting the rowdy road looking for whatever that was going to, be the thing that made me happy, I guess. And just where I could find some kind of balance. I learned to meditate when I was 17 years old in a way, and still couldn't touch it. It gave me hope. It gave me a sense that there was something wonderful here in around and through us, but I still couldn't touch it on my own. And so I drank, and I ended up hooking up with a boyfriend that I met in rehab, and I know some of you can identify with that. Rehab is where they keep a lot of the partners, isn't it? And I got me one, and we headed off into happy destiny, and ended up pitching a tent in the mountains in Southern Oregon, and lived there till the rains came, and then found this old roofless log cabin on top of a mountain, and ended up living there for a couple of years. And then the baby came, and I thought having this little girl was going to change the way I drank. I was 19 years old, and I still had high hopes. And we all know that alcoholism doesn't care who you love. By that time, we were drinking homemade wine and moonshine because it was organic and much better for you, and still there was no change. And I had had enough therapy to know that you got to break the cycle of parenting. You got to become the parent you never had. And by that time I was getting my clothes and shoes and the necessities of life out of a box behind a store in town. And I thought I was going to be a better parent than the ones I had. And I was delusional. And my daughter got in the way of one of our fights when she was about 10 months old. And, here again, I was a kid who grew up in the 60s, and I loved the idea of peace and love and that community and power that came with all of those people who sang about peace and love and freedom and all of that. But I kept ending up in violent situations, just like home. Now it's here. Everywhere I go, I want to be that. And I was stuck with who I was and how I was. And so I had to take the kid up the road where it's got to be better somewhere else. And I always felt like if I kept moving, I was going to be, any minute now, it's going to get better. And we ended up living down here in a little town in Southern California, and I was renting a room from my aunt, and I had gotten a job tending bar about 30 miles away in Hollywood. And my first legitimate work was in the bar business, and it never occurred to me not to drink on the job. Why else would you have that job? It just seemed to me to be cosmically efficient, and so every afternoon I'd kiss my daughter goodbye, who was almost 4 years old at the time, and I'd take off for the bar in Hollywood, and I'd get thirsty about halfway there. So I'd pull into the bar on the way to the bar and have a couple of shots of Cuervo and a couple of Bud Backs, 2 drinks in alcoholic math. And then I'd get up off the bar stool and head out to do my job every day till the wee hours of the morning, and crawl home and start over again. And one afternoon, I kissed my girl goodbye, and I took off doing my routine, stopped at the bar on the way to the bar, And to this day, I don't know what was different on that day from the day before, except for 24 hours, because I didn't hate the job I was going to, and I didn't love my daughter any less on that day than I love her today. But I sat on the bar stool that day and I drank those drinks, and this day I couldn't stop. This time, the knowledge that I needed to get up and go to a job I really liked going to. There was no trouble or trauma going on. I wasn't unhappy with it, but it wasn't enough to overcome the phenomenon of craving that happens once I start to drink. Nor was the knowledge that my little girl was waiting at home for her mommy to get there later on so we could play for a little while and then get up the next day and start over again. It just wasn't enough to overcome the phenomenon of craving that happens once I start to drink. I didn't know I had an abnormal reaction or allergy, if you will, to alcohol. I just thought I was a really crappy person. And I sat on that bar stool and I drank those drinks, and I lost the kid and I lost the job in one fell swoop. And for the next 4.5 years, I would come to or wake up knowing full well that my daughter was much better off where she was rather than being with me. And my heart would break every single day for those 4.5 years, and I still couldn't stop drinking. It wasn't enough. And I ended up marrying my drinking partner right about the time we should have split up. We just moved in together. I always thought it was circumstance, again, if I put the circumstance together, move indoors for a little while, make everything look okay, get the kid back, put all the outsides together, we would just, we would do better. And, again, he and I, we're living indoors on a regular basis, but we just became the neighborhood entertainment. We used to settle our arguments with a shotgun. Whoever got to the gun first won. That's how we did it. And it was dangerous and chaotic and frightening. And that's how it went every day. And, if you're anything like me, there were so many times that I thought that I set out to get drunk. I certainly enjoyed being drunk for a while, but then I didn't like the consequences. And it wasn't always. I mean, so many times I remember saying, and I still hear it said, I never wanted to drink like a normal person anyway. But I have to tell you that there were so many times I really wished I had. I really wished I could. I wish I could have 2 drinks and finish my shift. I wish I could have 2 drinks and take care of the business at hand. I wished I could have 2 drinks and not have my life fall apart completely almost every single time. And I couldn't. I could never guarantee if I was going to have 2 or 22. And most of the time it was the latter, not because I chose to, but because when I start drinking, something happens and it feels like I've changed my mind, and I just continue and to the bitter end. And I got my daughter back when she was 8.5, and I didn't get sober till she was almost 10. And, again, even a non-alcoholic can set out to get drunk if they pay attention. It's just that they don't do that very often, and they don't really care if they can or not. And me, most of the time, I was drinking against my will. And you'd think that when I got her back, that somebody like me might straighten up and fly right, and really, really, really take measures not to try not to lose her again. And when I got her back, I had one job during the week, 5 days a week, and that was to get in the car in the afternoon and go pick her up from school. It was a 10-minute drive each way, and most days I made it. But this particular day, I got in the car to go pick my daughter up from school, and on my way over there, I got thirsty. And I know those are 3 words that send chills down the spine of every alcoholic who drank like me, and that is that I got thirsty, and I've got no defense whatsoever, no mental, spiritual, nothing against picking up the first drink. I pull into the driveway of the bar and I order up a drink in the bar, and I start to drink it. And I think I got 45 minutes. I'm going to go have this one drink, and then I'm going to go get her. I'm sure of it. And then as I drink that drink, I think, but I may probably have time for 2. I'll have these 2, and then I'll go get her. And then 3 at the most. I'm going to have 3, and then I'm going to go get my daughter from school. And then somebody lines up the bar with empty shot glasses, and I can't turn down a free one. So I'm going to have 4, and then I'm going to go get her. And then there's 5 and 6, and now I'm drunk and I'm late. And I finally peel myself off the bar stool, because God forbid let it happen again, that I lose her. So I get in the car and I drive over to the school, and I have to go into the front office to pick her up, because that's where they keep the kids whose parents can't get there in time. And I walk into the office and the best defense is an offense. So I'm mad at the staff because I'm late. And as I go walking across the office to give them what for about it, I trip over my own feet and I go rolling across the floor of the office where my daughter attends school. And as I went rolling across the floor of the office, I caught a glimpse of my daughter's face and the look in her eye as she watched her mother go rolling across the floor of the office. And I felt that sense of powerlessness, not the kind of powerlessness like, oh my God, I've got to do something, but the kind of powerlessness like, oh my God, I am never going to change. I am never going to change. So the best I could do was to get up and grab her hand and get out of there before they called the police like they were threatening to do. And that kind of thing happened for the next little over a year. And I got to tell you, this was the best we had ever had. This is the best we'd ever gotten it. We were living in the city, indoors, on a regular basis, had a car, and still, this was as good as it got. And so circumstances didn't even matter. And finally, about a little over a year later, my husband and I and my daughter, and how the marriage was still together was purely survival, I think, for each of us. We were living in a tiny little apartment, and it's a Saturday afternoon, and now the cops are in the driveway one more time, and the neighbors are watching us again, and the kids scared to death again. And none of us set out to do that day. We just started the day. If everybody will be cool, we'll all be all right. And then he drinks and I drink, and then he says something and I say something, or vice versa. And then, it blows up, and there we are again. And finally, later that, in a little while, the cops left. They took the gun. The husband left for the last time, and it was me and the kid and the booze, and I still couldn't stop drinking. And here's where a hard drinker might take a look at their life and say something like, I'm tired of this. I can't control it. I'm going to stop. And they do. I've seen them do it in the bars. I've seen them do it all over the place. They set it down, and they may have a story to tell if somebody asked them, but they move on with their life. And that's the end of that. But me as an alcoholic, what I did was I just pulled the booze closer to the couch so I didn't have to keep getting up to get another drink, because I drank through my circumstances. I drank through drug addiction, and I drank through homelessness, and I drank through the loss of my daughter, and I was getting ready to do it again. And my first sponsor told me, when we started talking about the second step, she said, why don't you just start by counting the coincidences in your life? Those situations that seem to fall together for the good of everyone without you having your hands on it, coincidences. And I like that. For me, the second step just meant maybe anyway. And so, to start to look at my life a little differently. And the first coincidence I could count was that I had moved in next door to a woman who had 5 years of sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous. We didn't even know it. We'd been living there for the last year, and there she was. And she had seen and heard that whole deal go down. And a couple days after that, she came over and knocked on my door and brought me a big book and a 12 and 12. And, the longer I stay sober, the more I realize how brave that was of her in this day of, none of your business and all of that. She didn't know what she was getting into when she knocked on my door. And yet there she was. And when I opened the door, she asked if she could come in and talk to me. And for whatever reason, I said yes. There was just like grace is all around us all the time. But now I could, there was just enough of a weak point inside me that I began to cooperate with it. And she came in and sat down, and she didn't talk about what she saw me do. She started talking about her and her drinking. And, even then, for just a moment, the sick side of my head said, I wonder why she's talking about drinking. And then the other side, thank God, said, why, so shut up. And she kept talking, and as she talked, I would think about times that I would run into her on the premises earlier that year, like out in the parking lot and in the laundry room. And she hadn't been drinking then either. And what really impressed me about that was it didn't seem to bother her that she wasn't drinking. And that got my attention. I didn't know how you did that. All I knew is that when I had no booze or steps or fellowship or God of my understanding, no sufficient substitute anyway, I felt like you stripped the coating off my wires. I felt oversensitive and self-centered and underloved, and I didn't know what you meant by that or why you looked at me that way. And my self-centered head would close in on me from there. And so much so that even though I knew a little bit about booze by that time, I didn't know we called it the phenomenon of craving, but I knew that I couldn't guarantee if I was going to have 2 or 22. I knew that. I also knew that I no longer needed to invite trouble. It just seemed to come to visit unsolicited, doesn't it? Sometimes it'll walk right through the front door at you. And, the window of relief had gotten really, really small, 20, 30 good minutes. And then, the day would go downhill. I would go downhill. So I didn't know how her 12 little thinly veiled Sunday school sentences were going to have any effect on me in the face of what I'd become. They just seemed a little weak, like I'd tried them all before. And so I didn't get sober that day. It was about a week and a half later. I came home and it was a Friday afternoon and I didn't have any big plans, but I just didn't go anywhere. I didn't go buy any more booze. My daughter was away for the next week and I just sat in that little apartment and there was no more treatment left for me. People have been trying to help me all my life. And I sat in that little apartment and luckily, I didn't die. I mean, with alcoholic withdrawals are pretty intense. And I did get pretty sick over the weekend, but into Monday and into Tuesday, I began to, physically come around. And, but Tuesday afternoon, I was stark raving sober with no, nothing to replace that with yet. And so in that state of restlessness, irritability, and discontent, and I found myself standing on my neighbor's doorstep one more time, one more cooperation with Grace, asking her what to do. And more than that, when she told me what to do, and I found myself doing it. I found myself driving up to the meeting in Sierra Madre that night and sitting in that chair. And I sat way back by the exit sign and the open door just in case, but I sat there and I heard, that beautiful chatter that we hear before all the meetings, that people caring about each other and asking each other how they're doing and all of that stuff. And then I heard somebody say, "Hey, Joe, how's your lawn?" And I thought, what? Your lawn? I mean, what? That just sounds like small talk and I don't know how to do that. And wow, it sounded like hope, like, oh my God, could my life ever be so elegant and simple as to be concerned about a lawn? It just sounded nice and sweet to me, like, God, could it ever be just about a Saturday afternoon smelling fresh cut grass? It sounded good. And so I sat there. I was curious. I didn't really know what was going on. And at the end of the meeting, the secretary asked me to read a portion of that chapter 12, A Vision for You, that we read at the end of a lot of meetings. And I took it from her. I said yes. And I didn't know really what I was doing. I just read. And as I read, I came into the room just a little bit. I want to say too that I was so glad when I at the beginning of the meeting that they read a portion of chapter 3, more about alcoholism, because that told me without telling me that you guys knew something about how I drank. You did it too, and that you had a solution. I could see it. That I love that line in Bill's story where he says, "Here was something at work in the human heart that had done the impossible." And that big book, that chapter, just put words to that. That you guys drank like me, you got it, and now I could look around and see that a few people knew what to do about that. So it made me sit further in my seat. And at the end, I'm reading that chapter, A Vision for You, and it sounded, again, more hope. And, the obsession to drink alcohol wasn't lifted for me right away. But every day there was enough trouble. There was a lot of trouble and just enough hope for me to pay attention and do what it was that you guys told me to do. And, meetings alone don't keep me sober, but meetings are where I heard about steps and integrity and those moments where you reminded me that you got it. You have what I have, and you had a solution for it. And so I continue to walk, and I had to drink one more time at 89 days. And that was the last time I ever had to have a drink. And, it's so funny. We're, in the doctor's opinion, we too, my home group is an online big book and 12 and 12 step workshop. And we go through it all very slowly. And it's a workshop format. So we, double dip and we share and we really dig down into the chapters and experience of everybody. And just that combination of fellowship and experience plus the instructions just provided an unshakable foundation for living, So when I called my sponsor and had to tell her that I had drank, I only had to stay out about a day and a half. And luckily I got to come back in. It's not a given for everybody if we go back out. That's why we just say stay. You know, people used to say things like sit on your hands, and I got that totally. I got it. Sit on my hands until that obsession was finally lifted for me. And it's different for everybody when that happens, but it, you know, it does happen. And I had to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And thank God nobody said, "Oh, too bad you had your chance." They invited me to come and make coffee with them and do all those little jobs we have inside, you know, either online or in the rooms, where we actually had coffee cups and ashtrays back then, and chairs to stack and hands to shake and all of those things, floors to mop. And what I began to discover by doing those little jobs is that for just a moment, I was experiencing the absence of the noise on the inside of my own head, you know, and I really needed that until that internal change could happen, where those steps really took root in me. And I came to trust the process in the first 9 steps. And then step 10 tells me to continue to do that. What I just did in steps 1 through 9, to keep doing that, and that it will become an integral part of my being. And step 11 says grow that, and sends me out into the world to connect, tethered to Alcoholics Anonymous, to connect to all of and any and all paths to spirituality. That this Bill Wilson called Alcoholics Anonymous a spiritual kindergarten, and a lot of people like to stay and only use these, but for me, step 11 says this and that, and then we become less of us and them and more of we. I am bodily and mentally different from my fellows in that I have alcoholism, but in spirit, I don't have alcoholic spirit. I have spirit just like everybody else. We're not a different species. And so in that, there's been a unifying spirit as well. We're not us and them anymore for me. Anyway, I hope that made sense. But and then 12 says share it. Step 12 says share it, you know, in my home, in all my affairs, and to work with other alcoholics. Because boy, I'll tell you something. I know no better way to say this, but the only 5th step I like better than mine is yours. You know, you draw for me things I didn't know I needed to share, and you share with me things I didn't know I needed to hear. And whether that's in a formal inventory or just on a phone call or in a cup of coffee or on the way to the meeting, you know, we disclose these things about ourselves to each other, and we find out that we're not alone in that either. And that, you know, multiplies in spirit and strength. And so anyway, that's what happened as I began to trust this. And I made that first round of amends to my family, and at about 9 months sober, and somewhere around there, the obsession to drink was finally lifted for me. And then other people started asking me to sponsor them, and you know, and on I went. And then it became a practice. It became a practice and growing of this thing that has taken root in me called Alcoholics Anonymous. And after a couple of years, I had you guys. My daughter didn't have anybody really, so she was angry. She was an angry 11-year-old, and she'd been jumped into a gang, and she was drinking and using and all over the place, you know. And I was afraid for her, and I ended up finally putting her in a treatment center for youth, for adolescents at her age, and I showed up when they asked me to, and I stayed away when they asked me to. And I like to say this in case that there are any parents out there who are just getting sober, and that even though I wanted to change, I wanted to give her a different life, I wanted to offer her every opportunity to be healthy in spirit and mind and body, all of that, it was still hard sometimes. And you just got to know that sometimes, you know, we're not promised that life isn't going to be hard, and it doesn't mean we're not working a program if it is. It just means, you know, we're able to meet these challenges. And many times, even still, I need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable so I can loosen my grip on how I want things to be in exchange for how it really is, the great reality, that with a capital GR, you know, and matching that, have a pretty interesting life. Anyway, it took from the time she was 11 till she was about 23 for us to write that relationship. And I know that doesn't happen for everybody. Some kids never want to see their parents again, and I had to be ready for that too. But it was still for me to offer it to her. And when she was 16, she came home, and we found out she was pregnant, and I got to tell her, I'll be you know, I'm here for whatever you need, whatever you want, whatever you need, I'm here. And I got to be present at the birth of my first grandson. And that kid just turned 29 in May, and he just finished practicing his second year of law. And then her youngest just turned 23, and he didn't want to go the school route, but he's working his way through life and just you know, seeing what he wants to do. He's a different young man than his brother, and they're both really, really good people. And as is my daughter, you know, she grew up eventually, and just about 10 years ago, my husband and my mended family got to sit and watch her collect her master's degree. And she became the kind of a person who, she became a social worker, and the kind of a person who goes into the aftermath of things like the Las Vegas shooting and the San Bernardino terrorist act, and sits with the families of the victims and helps them put the pieces of their lives back together. That's who she is. And I don't know if she is who she is because or in spite of me, but I know that because of Alcoholics Anonymous, I get to be a privileged witness in her life and in the lives of anyone who wants to be in mine. And that took a day at a time, right? It was like the sobriety cha-cha, you know, 2 steps forward, 1 back, 1 forward, 3 back, and just like that. And that's just how it is. And what has changed is my attitude. And I started to say this earlier, but I'll say it now. And that is, you know, before Alcoholics Anonymous, everything required a drink. Thinking required a drink, doing required a drink, showing up required a drink, everything. And then eventually I was able to do none of those things. And in Alcoholics Anonymous over the last 36 years, there has been not one thing that has happened where I've thought that a drink would make any of this any better. And that's a different kind of surrender. You know, I meet the challenges of my life and the joys of my life with, well, how do we do this? You know, this is kind of fun. I don't like this. Okay, here we go, you know. And my old sponsor, Lee, used to say, it's not a requirement to like everything I have to do, but it is a requirement to do, to utilize these principles. And it's not always pain and work either. There's a lot of joy inside all of this, alongside. So on and on we went. And when I was 5 years sober, I came home from work one night, and I went to bed and woke up in the middle of the night to a man standing over my bed with a knife to my neck and his hand over my mouth. And he said, "Don't say a word or I'll cut your head off." And he took the telephone cord and he tied my hands behind my back and he raped me and he robbed me that night in my room. And I got to tell you that at 5 years of sobriety, I had a much, you know, different concept and a much bigger God, if you will, or sense of life force or connection than I had ever had. And so I was able to meet it with more quiet. I certainly fear, but I wasn't screaming for a drink. I was wondering how, you know, and how to meet the moment. And he was there for several hours, and I got away for a few minutes and ran for the front door, and I couldn't get the front door open. The lock had jammed. So we ended up in an altercation. And instead of getting more angry, he dropped the knife and he ended up going out the same window he came in. And it turned out that I knew this guy. I'd actually watched him get sober 30 days before I did. And then I watched him get his life, his wife, his kids, and everything back. And then I watched him join the church and leave AA behind. And when he went out, that's what happened. And what I chose to learn from that is that while the big book tells us to be quick to see where religious people are right, to make use of what they offer, Alcoholics Anonymous is the place where I learned the terms and conditions of my alcoholism. This is where I learned that I'm not one of those people who can go home after a Sunday sermon and have a glass of wine. I learned that here, and then I can go anywhere I want to and worship, tethered to Alcoholics Anonymous, not instead of. And so anyway, you know, again, spirituality is available, spiritual teaching, spiritual instruction is available everywhere. But what we do here in AA is we take spirituality and we aim it right at alcoholism. That's our single purpose. That blue card that was read at the beginning of this meeting, this is what we do here. And a few months later, there was a trial. And as part of the defense, they had a lot of the guys I'd known years before get up and testify as to who I used to be. Kind of like a big public fifth step, only they're doing it for you. And then we had to get a character witness for me. And by that time, I was working at a big fancy investment firm downtown Los Angeles. It's a place I never would have walked in the front doors of years before. I would have had no business being there. And now, class by class and task by task, I'm walking right alongside some very accomplished people, undetected, you know. And the division head there volunteered to come and testify on my behalf as to my character. And I always like to remind you that when I was new, you could not use the words Carla and good character in the same sentence. And now 5 years later, you know, here we are, and this you know, elegant uh, man of character is testifying as to mine. And they told him all about who I used to be, and he said, well, I don't know about that, but she shows up early and she stays late, and she was where she said she was. And see, that's Alcoholics Anonymous speaking for itself. He didn't have to be coached. He just got up and told the truth as he'd experienced it through me. And then it was my turn to testify. And up until then, my sponsor and I had had a lot of talks, and I'd done a lot of inventory about forgiveness and trying to get to that. Because at 5 years of sobriety, I don't want resentment. I don't want to live in fear like that. But the guy had shook me, you know, and anger was still my favorite way to meet fear like that. Anger is a power, but unless it's used transformatively, it becomes resentment. And I knew that. And so the 7-step prayer became my mantra in that way. I'm not a nugget prayer sayer necessarily, but that prayer helped me keep my eye on the ball. It helped me remember what it was I was trying to do. And the way I practice the 7-step is that I cooperate, and I think it's the rubber hits the road step. I have information about how I want to be different, and now I have to take every opportunity to actually be different rather than just sitting around waiting for God to do that, because we all know that that could take forever and it may never happen. So I got to cooperate with it. And, you know, Bill says the same thing in the 7-step essay in the 12 and 12. He says, we have to try with the will or else fall by the wayside. And I wanted to be different. And so now I'm sitting in the witness stand, and I look out and I see him, and I'm asking for this, and I'm in a posture of that internally. And what came to me were the words in our 4th step resentment inventory was, though we didn't like those symptoms and the way these disturbed us, they, like ourselves, are spiritually sick. He, just like me, is spiritually sick. Haven't I sat in his seat? Couldn't I again sit in his seat? Maybe not for rape, but something equally as destructive. Or am I right now so self-centered and unthinking that I'm roaring through the lives of someone like that proverbial tornado, and that even the playing field for me, you know, internally. And I looked, and what happened for us is we just became 2 alcoholics sitting on opposite sides of the courtroom. And I, you know, that's my 10th step as well. Is it haven't I, couldn't I, am I right now? You know, it slows my roll in for judgment and allows just enough breath for a new thought to come in. It's all that happens in the pause. Everything in steps 1 through 9 is what happens in the pause. Anyway, the forgiveness came that day. The healing took a while longer, as it does. It's just normal human recovery, you know, from something like that. But it did. With some work. And the detective who worked the case came to me after it was over, and he said, I don't know who you were back then. I'm not even sure I want to know, but whatever it is you're doing now, keep doing it, because it seems to be working. And that's Alcoholics Anonymous speaking for itself. And he was sentenced to 20 years, and he did 12, and then he did 3. And as far as I know, he's not been able to stay sober or out of prison, but I know that it works in those places. I've had the privilege of carrying the message of AA into every place I've ever been locked up, and then into the men's prison and the county jails here. And it works where it's worked. And we didn't know it at the time, and I'm glad we didn't know until the trial was over, but the judge had been a long, sober, recovered alcoholic. And the court reporter was the Al-Anon mother of a woman in my home group. So the 12-step fairies had thoroughly dusted the room before we got there. And, you know, I didn't have to go through that alone if I didn't want to. My dad was there. My sponsor was there, sponsees, people from my home group. So again, if I didn't want to, I didn't have to go through that alone. And, you know, that was the first 6 years of my sobriety. And then my dad got sick, and I was the one he called when he got cancer, and I got to walk through that with him. He had begun to trust me enough, to where I was the one he called. And, he doesn't have to sit up nights anymore watching the news to make sure his daughter's name isn't on the list of the victims of the serial killers of the day. He sleeps well, and he knows why. I come from a family where my baby sister committed suicide at the age of 17. My baby brother died of drug addiction and alcoholism when he was 30. And my last remaining sibling lives in Wisconsin. And when she's not drinking, she's on the Vicodin maintenance diet. And I am thoroughly convinced that because of Alcoholics Anonymous, and not just that, but because I was exposed and I picked up the kit of tools that you handed me, because we have to make some effort. It doesn't just, necessarily come over us. I had to make an effort and meet these. I get to stay here. I've been here 36 years, and, my family doesn't have to wonder where I am, or don't I love them, or why can't they find me? That doesn't happen either. And, I've had big jobs, little jobs, no jobs. I left corporate so that I could, follow this calling inside of me and see what it was next. And I was willing to go to any length. So I've had, I've taught Zumba, I've driven a limo, I've worked at Home Depot, and all of those I'd said became my monastery. I love this quote by a woman named Paula Darcy, who says, God comes to us disguised as our lives. And so there's no place where God is not, this life force. It is in everything I do. And everything that I meet in my life is the opportunity for this growth. So I ended up getting later on, I got married to a man that a lot of you, or a few of you, know anyway. I was 21 years sober, and he likes you to know he was 22, and he's my best friend. We've been together 15 years and married 13 now, and God, and he's my inspiration and my pal and my friend, my confidant. And I got my license to be a massage therapist. I went legit, and I had a little business for about 6 years, and then the pandemic came down, so that shut down. But while that was happening, I had begun to start to do this art that's an ancient art. Lots of millions of people do it. It's mosaic work, and it's where we take broken pieces of things that used to be other things, and then we glue them and attach them to other things, and they become new things. And so what does that sound like? Anyway, so last year I took a 7,500-mile trip across the country, delivering pieces of art that people bought from me. And it was I'm not going to get rich by that, but I got to tell you, the journey has been magnificent. And so I got hurt last December for a little while, and that slowed me down some. And I've had a lot of, all of my difficulties really happen in between my ears, and that's not necessarily alcoholic. The stakes for me as an alcoholic are a little bit different than a non-alcoholic, but everybody has this. I just have a way of addressing it. And I like to say, that even though spiritual information, spirituality is available all over the place, if you're not having a spiritual awakening, try ours. We have this little map. It's called the 12 Steps, and we have lots of people who are willing to help you do it. And anyway, and that's been the joy and the journey and the pain all tied up together. So my daughter, she's doing well. I think I told you she's 46 years old now. My mother passed away about 16 years ago. And my dad will be 90 this year. He just moved in with his girlfriend. So, they're like weeble and wobble and living their best life. So, you just never know. But I'm so glad. And I have to credit Alcoholics Anonymous with the fact that I get to be around here to enjoy it. So grace is all around us, but I do believe that I have to take the actions necessarily, even if it's a necessary, or even if it's only a new attitude to access it. But it's available to all of us. Thanks so much for having me today, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.